So concluding on test ideas, I just wanted to share some insights into prioritizing test ideas. Test ideas are plentiful. There's lots of variety. Uh, Good idea for a project would be to have a lot of different types of ideas so they can choose the ones that are the most valuable for your team. Some ideas overlap other ideas, so you might have a benefit from, for example, doing a usage scenario-based testing over functional testing, just because each usage scenario touches many functions. But usage scenario is only testing the functions as far as they're required to get a specific user's job done. So they don't look at the relationship between the function and generic work or the function and many different jobs. What I like to suggest is that before you start, you have the workflow figured out as to how you're going to prioritize and organize your testing. And that, to a large extent, means how are we going to decide which test ideas are going to become test objectives and become part of our actual testing work, and which test ideas will be rejected. So one of the things that I like to suggest you do is triage. Triage, modeled a little bit after medical triage. Assuming that you don't have enough resources to solve the problem, you want to find the most critical problem you can address with the resources you have. Now, some things you can't do because you don't have the resources, so you'll probably want to defer that until you have the resources. And then you have a project plan problem of getting the resources to do the job. In the meantime, there's probably a lot of other high priority things you can do with the resources at your disposal. So one of the things about triage is to understand the criticality of the test, or the criticality of the knowledge the test would give you. So how critical is it that we know the usability of a system? And actually, before we deploy, it may be very critical because we want to basically be able to get like 4 stars on some social media site. And if we can anticipate that if we release now, we'd probably only get 2 stars, maybe we want to change the user experience to sort of up the market a bit. So is that critical for us? Maybe it doesn't matter. If it's a factory management system, the usability might not be the first thing in importance. You can train people to do things even if it's not a usable system. So how critical is it? How critical is the knowledge we'd gain from doing that test? What skills and what people and what equipment do we need to do the job? Effectively, how would we staff it? How do we get it done? So what resources are required? This is something that we need to know about a testing idea. We might not know the exact detailed test procedure, test cases, test data, but we probably have an idea of whether we need to have any specialized equipment or skills or people to get the job done. If it's a performance analysis, we may want a performance engineer involved in helping to develop the test, for example. And if it's, for example, some data-centric test where we're going to follow the path of data from source to end, maybe we want to make sure that path is accessible to us. Is it available to us or not? So this is basically resources required to implement the test idea. Do we have the resources? And in medical triage, it's like suggesting, well, if we have 2 people who are ill and one requires a cardiovascular surgeon and one requires a neurosurgeon, well, you basically, if you have only a cardiovascular surgeon available, you look for the highest priority patient you have that benefits from the skills available at the time, and then you make it your mission to get someone who can deal with the other injuries. But right now you have a cardio surgeon, keep them busy with the most important thing you can. It's a little bit how triage works. Then there's trade-offs. We can't possibly test everything. It is impossible. Complete testing is impossible. So we always have to make trade-offs. And how do we make the trade-off is something I hope that's the decision-making that is as simple and graceful as you can make it. For example, many times when you're doing like unit testing work, the decision of what's in and what's out might rely solely on the programmer who's working on that task assignment, or maybe the programmer and his lead, or maybe the programmer and a pair who's a tester. Very rare at unit testing and development are you going to go to the product owner or the project manager or the business stakeholders about what's in and what's out. But For business acceptance testing, you probably want the product owner involved in the decision of what is indeed a reasonable set of business acceptance tests. So different people might be required for different sort of types of testing or different types of test ideas, and where they fit in might be different too. So there's going to be trade-offs made. And when we're looking at the information we're using to make these trade-offs, I think it's also something we've got to be sensitive to is the credibility of the information that we've got. Now, if I just take a spreadsheet and write down the relative importance of everything from the point of view of business, and for some of them it's a wild guess, and for other ones I have scientific fact, I want to be able to distinguish the two. I want to be able to tell the credible from the not credible stuff, and before I make a decision on it, try to balance the credibility a bit of the information I'm working with. So some people do a triage approach, which is called the impact estimation. Impact estimation is advocated a lot by Tom Gilb. It's discussed a bit in his book, Competitive Engineering, where he talks about how to do the impact estimate. And basically, from a test idea perspective, the practical thing for me is for each and every test idea to try to basically answer 4 questions about it. So for each test idea, ask the question, what would be the benefit of implementing the idea? What would be the benefit of implementing the idea? So if we did it, what's the benefit to us? How does that knowledge advance us? Is it knowledge we're just going to put in a shelf or in a file folder? It probably doesn't advance us very much. If it's knowledge that allows us to be regulatory compliant, it probably enables the product to be shipped. So there's a different benefit from each test idea. So we want to know what is the benefit. At the same time, we want to know the consequence of doing it. The consequence of doing it is usually some sort of a cost or an opportunity cost. A cost would be a real cost, like it could cost us $1,000 a day to do that because of the equipment and the people. But there's also an opportunity cost of the people, resources, or equipment might not be available to do something else at that time, and that other thing might also have value and benefit of implementation. So it's always like trade-offs. So we look at the benefit and consequence of implementing it, and then we sit back and we say, well, is there also a benefit and consequence of not implementing it? A benefit of not implementing it could be similar to the consequence of implementing it, or it could be something else. So some people say that the benefit of not implementing something is it's a sort of can of worms. If we get in there and we start fixing it, maybe we're going to have a commitment to delivering it. And maybe the best thing to do is not to test that feature. In fact, to pull or disable that feature on the product and not do it at all. So there's a benefit for not doing something. We can wait till the next release. Let's take that whole feature, put it under wraps. And so there's a benefit for us for not doing it. Consequence of not implementing it. There's all sorts of weird consequences. I like to talk about the Apple IV, which when released in 2010, didn't work from the point of view of voice telephone calls on popular networks in the States because of an antenna problem. And this was certainly not tested, or not very thoroughly tested, as part of the activity. Now, the consequence of not implementing that test was they didn't know. And they didn't know they're taking a big business risk. Now, as it worked out, it worked in Apple's favor not to worry too much about that. But other companies might have gone bankrupt by a similar thing. So the consequence of not implementing something is basically is possibly that we will hurt someone, that we will cause some harm, and we don't know about it a priori. We can't give workarounds if there's problems. We can't manage certain expectations. We can't come up with contingency plans. All I'm asking, and I'm not saying that you should spend a lot of time on this, but for every test idea that you're considering, do you have an answer to these 4 questions? Frankly, if there is no answer for these 4 questions, it's probably not a very important test idea. If you have an answer to even one of them, that's going to help guide you into saying what's the relative priority of this testing idea. For credibility, just to share with you, this is a chart that Tom Gilb used to talk about measuring credibility. And he basically says when you have information, it could have a ranking of credibility. He goes between 0 and 1, where 0 is just a wild guess with absolutely no credibility. And 1 is something that's perfectly credible with scientific evidence, a contract guaranteed. We definitely know it to be true. And everything else in the middle is a different sort of level of credibility. I think this is a bit much, too fine a scale for most projects. What I do personally is I use 3 levels of credibility. So in fact, and I use fonts to do this. So I will put, for example, anything that has questionable credibility, I'll put an italic font. Anything that has strong capability, I'll put it in bold font, and everything else I'll leave in a normal font. So when it comes down to deciding something, if my spreadsheet with the information about credibility, information about the benefit and consequence of doing or not doing something, I will put italics when there's low credibility, bold when there's high credibility. And the minute I start comparing something with low credibility to high credibility, I want to improve my knowledge before I make the decision. So basically try to get the credibility up before making the decision, learn more before making the decision. It's also possible when you do triage that, of course, you're going to reject some ideas, but sometimes rejecting testing ideas is actually another source of testing ideas. So why not? If the benefit doesn't make business sense or doesn't provide knowledge that's helpful to the team, why not do part of the test? So if you take a test and you're going to skip it, maybe if we did part of it, we can get part of the benefit, but at a more reasonable cost. So consider making the test idea smaller. Or you can also try to say, maybe I should make it a bit bigger. Maybe if I made it a bit bigger, it would generate more of a benefit. So take the test idea, expand it a bit. Maybe that would generate enough benefit. And also, if the test idea is intent on learning something, well, maybe there's a different test that we could do that could learn something very similar to the one we would learn. Now, a classic example for a different test would be a load test. Load testing, commercial load testing tools in some contexts are very expensive. Some of the most expensive tools I've ever worked with, over $100,000 for basic licensing of load testing tools. This is very, very expensive. Now, there's also lower cost tools. The lower cost tools have less acuity, and there's even the possibility that you and your team instrument the product so that you subtract some of the information without using an external tool. This becomes a trade-off. So when you're trying to learn about performance and you say the tool is way too expensive, we can't do that, well, maybe part of the knowledge you can get without an expensive tool by instrumenting your code. So it's a different test that would give you some of the benefit with a lot less of the cost. So that's basically the sort of idea of taking a different test, learn similar stuff. So where does it fit into a project, this sort of triage or prioritization thing? Well, if you're doing your typical project today, you probably are doing agile development of some sort. In agile development, you probably have a planning meeting towards the beginning of the sprint. Your discussion of what's in and what's out and what test ideas to consider is the discussion in that is a natural discussion for that planning meeting. So I would say for each and every story that you choose to develop in the planning meeting, you're trying to identify what is the real technical work that you're trying to do. That is the perfect place for doing test triage on a story-by-story basis for an agile team. If you're doing more of a waterfall development or more of an engineered development, probably you want to review the testing ideas at about the same frequency maybe that you triage bugs. So if you do a bug review meeting every week, maybe you want to do a test triage meeting every week. The more turbulence you have, the more change in the air, probably the more frequently it's better to do. I certainly have done triage on a daily basis on some projects and on a weekly basis on some projects, depending on the amount of turbulence. All right, so what do we do when we're doing a triage session? Before we dive in and start looking at the new test ideas, we should basically check our context. Has anything changed? Are any of the business factors different? Are any of the technical factors different? They're using a different compiler. We have a new customer. Organizational factors, we're still the same team. Half of the people aren't being moved to another country or something. And we have maybe cultural elements have changed. I don't know. So we're looking to say, has the context changed? What new information do we have since the last time we met? What bugs have we been finding since the last time we met? And what new test ideas have we discovered since the last time we met? So we want to make sure that we're in sync about that. This is the context thing. Of course, anything changed in the business, technology, organization, or cultural elements. Information, what did we learn from our testing? Are there parts of the product that are unstable, or parts of the product that are really robust? And of course, what type of bugs are being fixed, or are we identifying? Are there any patterns? Are there any common causes? And sometimes the reveal with the bugs is that maybe we should wait for some test ideas because there's some piece of code that we already know a lot about. If we added testing, we're just going to be testing a buggy feature more and more. Why not wait for it to be more stable before we dive in? And of course, we want to make sure that we consider new test ideas, not just from those of us who are working on the project, which is a great source of testing ideas, the people working on the project, but also we want to look around the project. We want to look at people in the support department, in training department, administrators, customers, users, outside of the small group of people who are actually developing the software to get ideas. And we can get great testing ideas from people by asking them to sort of complement what we've already done. They don't have to have a lot of knowledge of testing, but they have to have some sort of experience with the product. So trainers, for example, who have trained people who are users of the product will probably know a lot about the workflow and the real day-by-day work of the user, and that might be a great source of ideas. Similarly, sysadmins would know the pain of installing, configuring, and keeping the thing up and running. So different people will have different views, but by sort of culling them from time to time, we're going to get a rich set of test ideas to triage. Of course, when it's time to do the work, we've got to make sure the person who's doing the actual work knows the context, and it's someone who's got the right skills. So we're testing the thing that's the most important. We have the best person to do it with the right skills to do it. And it's inappropriate to take someone who doesn't have certain skills and ask them to do a job that doesn't have the skills. So it's important for us to know, for the people on our team, what skills do they have before we sort of assign them or ask them to take upon the job. We want people who are the best people to explore or lead the adventure. And we want to check always, do we need any subject matter or domain experts available while we're doing the work? So test ideas have a sort of a life. They come into existence. If it sounds important, we might clear up the description of it. Then we'll prioritize it. And if it's important enough, if it's high priority enough, then it becomes integrated into some sort of test objective, and it becomes part of our project. Not everything becomes part of our project, but everything is considered. So there's really, for me, there's no bad test ideas. There's just ones that we decide not to invest in. The question comes up a lot about skipping tests. Of course, we can't test everything. So it might be a good idea to sort of take a look at a test idea and ask, if this test failed, would the system still be of value to some of our customers or stakeholders? If we skip this test, would there be another way to find this information? And these might be reasons for sort of saying, okay, I'm not going to do that type of testing because the system would still have a lot of value even if those tests failed. Or if we skip the test, we'd find important bugs in another way. For example, we might be doing a beta testing cycle, and the beta testing cycle will try a real workflow. Now it'll be painful if we find a bug there, but we will find it before we go to production. In my experience, it's better to omit a test on purpose rather than to skip it because you ran out of time and forgot about it. So the idea for me on a software testing initiative is to try to come up with a rich variety of test ideas and then choose the ones that have the most value. Systematically collecting, evaluating, and triaging test ideas helps me decide what not to test, at least for now. And we must remember that we say at least for now, because if the context changes, we might have to review the whole project or the whole feature and sort of say, okay, well, this is another kettle of fish now. Anyhow, thank you very much. That's the last little bit I wanted to say about the subject of test ideas.